Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm delighted you could join me here in my studio for my online artist talk. I'm going to be speaking about the current body of work that I have on show in Linlithgow Borough Halls at the moment, which I have called Landmarks. It's a group show. I'll tell you a little bit more about that during the talk, but it's a group show and I have a series of charcoal works about a particular place called Calderwood. So that's what I'm going to focus on particularly tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully show you lots of pictures. Okay, so. Okay, so can you see a photograph of an exhibition interior and the word welcome? Can somebody give me a thumbs up? Yes, excellent. Okay, so this is an image from the current exhibition. It's a beautiful old building in Linlithgow, and the exhibition is on for a period of 3 months, which finishes towards the end of January. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the inspiration, the processes, and the kind of the concepts, if you like, and the ideas that are behind this body of work. If you have questions or if you'd like to know in more depth sort of aspects about my work that are more general or how I came to be an artist, I've actually got an earlier artist talk from 2022, which is also on YouTube, and I can put links out to that in the newsletter, and you can have a look at that too. I was looking back through other artist talks that I've done and realized that I've kind of done that already. So I'm not going to give you my whole life story, which might be a relief to many of you, but I'm going to talk about this specific body of work and a bit about technique and things as well. Okay. So this is where I am. This is in the summer, this is not now. And I have a studio at the end of my garden, which was built in 2017. So I've been here for 3.5 years now. And I've got a bit of space where I can work outside, and what you can see on the table there are some large charcoal works that I decided it was a nice sunny day and I could take outside to work on. So this is where I'm talking to you from at the moment. And the body of work that I'm going to be speaking about is called Landmarks. It's at the Borough Halls in Linlithgow, which is in central Scotland. It's a council-run arts and community venue, beautiful space with a lovely gallery. So I'm delighted to be the lead artist on that. So that's, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But firstly, I'm going to tell you about the woodland itself, so a place called Calderwood. I'm going to tell you a bit about my work in the wood, how I've got to know it, and I'm going to show you some of the landmark trees to begin with. So we're really starting from the inspiration point, if you like. And then I'll be showing you how that inspiration develops into finished artworks. So the Borough Halls is a beautiful building with lots of wall space, and it's really exciting to be showing with other people whose work is very different to mine. You can get a little glimpse of it there. Jenny Tufts is the artist who does very large, kind of bright acrylic paintings here. Anne Gilchrist has done more subtle, but also very kind of deeply colourful, poignant oil paintings. There's also a writer, Kirsty, and an illustrator, Cordula. So there's a variety of different work, and we have all responded to the place called Calderwood. So we've called it Contemporary Perspectives on an ancient woodland. So an ancient woodland site just means that it has, for the whole time that maps have been made, it has been a wooded area. So it doesn't necessarily mean that all the trees are ancient, but it means that it's been a wooded area for a very long time. It's also a place which is a site of special scientific interest. So there's a management plan for it, and the council manage it as part of a country park for local amenity. So I don't know how good you are with maps. Some people love them. I'm quite a map nerd. I love looking at maps. And this is a map of where Calderwood is. So I don't know if you know very much about Scotland. Some of you are local, some of you may not be. This is roughly where we are. So I'm in Edinburgh, just outside Edinburgh in Queensferry. So it's about 30 minutes drive from my house. This is quite local for me. I do travel all over the place to explore and get to know different trees, but it's really nice to have a place which is very local to me that I can go again and again. It feels like an island. It's not literally an island because it's in the centre of Scotland, but it is bounded by two rivers or two burns. So the Muirston water and the Linhouse water, and they come together. There's a confluence here, and this is the bridge, really the only way into the woodland site. So it's a long, thin peninsular sort of plateau, if you like, and that's why it's still wooded now. If it had been more accessible, then the surrounding urban development would have encroached on it. So there's a lot of new houses being built. There's a lot of industrialization. The area itself was mined for shale in the 19th century. There has been some forestry extraction, so some timber extraction in the past, but it's most well known as being a place where cattle were grazed. The Drovers Road runs through the village of Mid-Calder. The Drovers Road is one of the routes where people would drive the cattle to market. And we're talking, it's a very long tradition, but that sort of died out maybe in the 19th century. But what that meant was that as the drovers were passing through the village, they needed somewhere to put their cattle overnight, and Calderwood was one of the places. And that explains the reason why there's woodland, so there's trees in these areas, but there's an open wood pasture area here. And that gives the woodland a very interesting layered kind of habitat and atmosphere to it as well. So it's a place where humans have been active for centuries. It's got lots of kind of layers of different land use, but it's never been ploughed, it's never been farmed, it's never been lived on. So I have developed, I suppose, over the years, a particular process of how I get to know a place. So for me, as an artist, it's really important that I understand something about the place that I find the trees that I draw. So it's not just about an individual tree, it's about how that tree relates to the landscape, how the history and management and local culture has influenced the shape that that tree now has. So one of the things that I do is I wander about. I sometimes have a tracking app running so that I can see where I've been wandering about. And oftentimes I don't. I'll just go for a wander. But I do use maps, and I use that apps like that kind of thing to plot where some of the interesting trees are, particularly if I'm starting to get to know a place. So I first visited this woodland in 2016. So I've been visiting it for, 7 years, quite a long time. When I look back at my old photographs, I've got literally thousands of photographs of this place. I do look really young when I take the first ones, which is maybe not a good idea to take a picture of myself as well. But so it's been part of my life for quite a long time. I did a residency in an art centre quite close by, 2016, 2017, and that's really when I started to getting to know it very well. I like to follow all the human paths, but I also like to explore the animal tracks too, badger tracks, deer tracks, those sort of little inviting little ways through the bracken and around about would lead me to discover things that you wouldn't normally see if you were just walking along the path. So I have, it's not a very robust system, if you like, but I do have a way of, if I'm in a location with lots of different potential subjects for artwork, I do tend to plot them so that I know I can find them again, because it might be several years between visits, and although I do have a good memory for that kind of mental map, it's easy to forget as well. And I suppose that's where the idea of landmarks came from. So, if we use the word landmark, we might think of a building, a sculpture, some sort of public space, something like that. And we probably wouldn't really apply it as a term to a tree. But for me, the trees are the landmarks when I'm navigating around a woodland or a wooded landscape. And there are some trees that have a great deal of character, or have something which is particularly significant about their aspect or the way position where they are in the path, that kind of thing. So they become some of the kind of anchor points where I know where I am if I see that particular tree. I'm going to show you some examples of those. The other thing to say is that I get to know them really well. And it's a little bit like visiting old friends. So let's just say it like that. When I have got to know a tree, the next time I go back to the woodland, I feel like I've got to go and visit them. I've got to go and say hello. And they might have changed, and they might have bits might have fallen off, or they might look very different in different weather and seasons. But they're landmarks physically, but they're also landmarks emotionally and in my memory. So it seemed like a good word to encapsulate what I was trying to express, I suppose, in this body of work. So this is one of my landmark trees. I didn't actually put anything in the exhibition that I made from this tree, but it's a big old beech tree. So beeches, there were a few beeches throughout the woodland that were planted by the local laird to enhance the landscape. So these had an aesthetic reason for being planted. These are not naturally occurring trees. And this is one which has a lot of tree graffiti on it. Another word for tree graffiti is an arboglyph, which I like. I think that's a more elegant word, perhaps. But hopefully you can see on the right-hand side there, this is the oldest arboglyph that I have ever found. I am fairly convinced that says 1825. When you think about it, that's, the tree must have been a reasonable size at the time to have carved that in it. One thing that's distinctive about old tree graffiti is it's carved in an old font, an old-fashioned font, which makes it's quite an interesting idea that tree carvings have fonts, but you see it's got a much more kind of elegant form to the numbers, and letters have serifs on them as well. People took a lot of time to carve these things. So it's visually it's interesting, but it's very interesting to me culturally, because it shows that connection between humans and the trees in the landscape. So I imagine this particular tree to be one which people arrange to meet by, because it's in a very significant place next to a path. It's on a rise, so it's quite high up. It's a beautiful, big, open-grown beech tree. So I think that's a place where a tryst tree is. That's how I would think of it. It's a place where people would meet. There are other trees with stories. On the left is the remains of an oak tree. So it's an oak stump, and oak. I'm told that oaks were extracted from the woodland during the Second World War, and then it's a birch tree in that instance. A birch has planted itself in the oak stump. So it's two parts of a different tree. So the oak is no longer alive, but the birch has found the ideal little collection of nutrients to recycle. So that's a fantastic place for a tree to seed itself. On the right, this is what I believe to be a poacher's tree. So there are lots of deer in the wood, although they are quite shy because it's used a lot for dog walking. And see these steps here, well, they're planks, but they've been nailed onto the tree to form a ladder, essentially, so that you can get up to the crook of the tree in the crown and sit and wait for the deer to go past. And I've seen that in other places. Sometimes it's iron bars or kind of iron railings that are affixed to the tree, but it's a way of climbing up, so you're above the deer don't notice you. And I have seen evidence of poaching in there before, so remains of deer kills. I don't know who's doing it, but I think that's part of the appeal of a place like this. It's not wild, it's not wilderness, it's very close to an urban area. It's full of people at different times of the day, but it also has secret parts. It has little glades that nobody goes through. It has paths which are only walked by deer and badgers. And it has things like this. I don't know if that's currently still used, but in a way, the woodlands it can be a place to cross boundaries. It's got that little kind of element of danger, I suppose, about it. There are some trees that were just incredibly striking visually, and this was one which I pretty much spent a whole day with, drawing it, photographing it. It's another beech tree. It's clearly at the end of its natural life, and most of the trunk is decaying away, but there was just this one limb left. And you can see how exaggerated and lopsided that is. I mean, that's very, very unbalanced. I didn't think this was going to last very long, but I loved the contrast between the sort of solidity of the trunk here and the delicacy of these branches. And it was a really incongruous thing to see such a lopsided tree. So that led to a whole series of works, and there's some of those in the exhibition. And these two, again, landmark trees, very different characters. On the left is a birch tree. It's very hard to tell because you can't really see the trunk because it's completely covered in what's called witch's brooms, which is this sort of fuzzy growth here. It's the tree's natural response to an infection or attack from a virus, bacteria, fungi. It can be for a number of different reasons, but what you get is this really tangled, knotty sort of growth in particular places. And on the right, another beech tree which has pretty much collapsed, with parts of it lying in different directions on the ground, and all that remains is this sort of semicircle of a shell and one remaining very small living branch, but very vibrant. So if when I see that in the spring, it's full of leaf. And both of those trees are landmarks for me physically because they're at a turning point in the woodland where I would walk around, and they have a very strong character, a very different character. And this was what led me to develop works which, although they're all in charcoal, they have different characters. I was really trying to find a way to express the qualities of the individual trees. And then there are trees which have evidence of human intervention. Because I've known this woodland for quite a long time, I have seen the changes in the trees, and this one sadly due to fire, and fire intended to destroy. There's no doubt about that. There was a fire set at the base of the tree. So, it raises questions for me about how we as a society relate to our landscapes. How do we view these trees and the natural environment around? Is it something which people feel so alienated from that they want to destroy it? What are the reasons for doing that? I've never seen anybody doing that, but it makes me think about how people are relating to them. And this is what that tree looks like now. So it's fallen completely. As an individual, it makes me really sad to see that. It's a shocking thing to see. But as an artist, it's still interesting to me in a way. You know, I feel like it's part of my job, perhaps, to observe and document and reflect back. This is what's happening around us. And this one, which I've done several works from, there's one in the exhibition, is evidence of a different kind of humour and intervention. It's perhaps not obvious when you first look at it, but if you see the growth of the tree, it's very, very tall, and all the branch growth is on one side because it used to have a partner, and the partner tree was very close to it, sort of here. So there's a space where the partner used to be. Beeches are not thought of as native trees when it comes to conservation management. So it's less so now, but about 20 years ago or so, this is the local ranger is telling me the story, that it was decided that some of the beeches should be felled so that they didn't seed and overtake the other native trees. And this was one of the beeches that was felled. So the partner you can see just behind here, still the trunk lying on the ground. But the local people objected very vehemently, and the felling was stopped. So that meant that this tree was saved, but the partner had disappeared. So you know, again, as an artist, this attracts me on lots of levels. You know, visually, it's a very striking tree. It has all the kind of qualities of light and sculptural form that I find really interesting, but it's also got the story about the conflict, about the different decision making that affects our landscapes. So what appeals to me is their individual characters, is the complexity and the mystery and the physical presence that these trees have. I've got a quote there from one of my favorite books by Richard Mabey, the nature writer. So in their maturity, trees are so etched with experience, they become recognizable not just as species, but as individuals. And it's that individual character that I have been trying to make my work about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my process, about how I work on location and how I work in the studio as well, and how some of that, that process impacts on the work. I always begin with observational drawing. I always begin with that, you know, making the paths, exploring the place, choosing the subjects, and then just getting the sketchbook out and making lots of drawings. I usually do that in the winter and spring before the leaves come out and obscure things, and before the brackens in the way and things. It's just more practical. It's cold, but that's okay. I have a hat and have lots of layers and thermals. I can recommend cashmere socks. Somebody told me the secret and I've never gone back from that. This drawing was made, was a slightly larger scale than the sketchbook. This was made in the spring. I think that was probably sort of late April time. So the leaves are just beginning to come out. That's a glorious time to be in the woodland. You know, I usually don't see anybody else. I've got peace and quiet and just the birds and creatures around me. It's wonderful. But that drawing, I used Conte, Sanguine, and another kind of Conte crayon, which is a very practical material to use out in the woodland. These are sketches in charcoal. It's a lot less practical, and I tend not to do a lot of large-scale on-site drawings in charcoal because inevitably you've got to transport it back, and often it's quite a long walk. So charcoal being such a fragile material doesn't lend itself as well to that. As well as drawings, I take hundreds of photographs. I take photographs for reference, or just as a way of getting to know something. I tend to do the photography and the drawings in separate trips because it's a different mode of thought, I find, but I have a lot. In the studio, I do sort of research into the materials that I might use, what surfaces I might choose to fit in that particular work. And I'll go through a process of redrawing from my sketches, from photographs, from video, from memory, So just, you know, kind of starting to take that initial information that I've gained in the observational drawing and the visits and make it my own, really, I suppose. Here is a bunch of dried heather branches that actually make some very nice marks with the charcoal that I discovered. So that's been a part of the kind of testing aspect that I do. I use collage and cut out prints and physically move things around, and then also spend some time drawing in my my studio sketchbook, cropping, just testing ideas out. I make studies using digital techniques as well as the more obvious analog ones. So I use Snapseed, which is a great photo editing app on the iPad. I use Photoshop on the computer. So I start to manipulate the photographs that I've got to pick out particular parts that I think might be, you know, part of that kind of gathering, if you like, of information. I also use Procreate, which is a really good drawing application for the iPad. Definitely recommend that if you like drawing. And I've recently got a projector, which I found really useful for, I don't like the idea of kind of copying from a projector, because it's not like I'm trying to do a photorealistic piece of work, but it can help me imagine what scale things would work at. So I could perhaps make some studies and then project them small, project them large, different formats. That's quite a good way of exploring where the work might go to. Now I'm going to warn you, I've got a little video here, but it's making a horrible scratchy noise. If you don't like the sound of nails down a chalkboard, then I apologize, but it's quite a good way of showing you one of the ways that I work. So this is charcoal combined with oil paint. And this is one of the sort of studies, larger scale studies that I was making to explore what materials I was going to use for this body of work. So you can see there's a lot of applying and removing and scrubbing away at it. I really liked the qualities of that, but it didn't quite work for what I was aiming at for this particular work, but I may well go back to it. So this is how it might start. One of the questions that I was asked was about the speed of drawing, which I thought was really interesting because different people have very different approaches. But for me, a drawing starts with a very fast gestural, messy, impulsive sort of stage, and then gradually slows down to a much more careful, considered, delicate stage. And this is the fun bit. This is the bit that's always full of potential and excitement, and who knows where this might go. So it doesn't really look like very much now, but I think of that's like the skeleton of the drawing. That's the bit that underpins the whole thing. And then I will start blocking in the large areas of tone, but at the same time trying to preserve some of those accidental marks and some of that spontaneity from the original drawing. So you might call that the musculature. That's, you know, the kind of fleshing out the forms, but still hanging on to that the kind of marks underneath. And the white part in these drawings is just the surface. So I haven't applied any white drawing medium. It's just charcoal and the surface. So that gives it that kind of quality of shining out rather than having a white drawing material applied to the surface. And that's that work in the studio with some of my tools and things. And this study, oil and charcoal study, is up here, which was good for reference. It had some things that worked in it, and I was just trying to transfer them across to the other work. And then I just put in a few close-ups, because it's always hard to tell when you're looking at something on a screen, just to give you an idea of the sort of textures. So some of these sort of accidental marks are from that original underpainting, if you like, and then there are other marks that are much more considered, you know, focused, very particular marks. And it's an exciting way to draw, and it's definitely one which suits me. And this is a work that I'm really proud of. I'm very pleased with this one. It's one of those that I had the image in my head long before I made it. And that can be dangerous because sometimes it's very disappointing when it doesn't turn out how you thought it might. But I was very pleased with this. And I also really like the fact that it's hanging next to this lovely old fireplace as well. So that's in the exhibition in Linlithgow. And it is still available should anybody want something very impactful on their walls. Okay, we'll move on to a bit about drawing then, a bit about my materials and tools, how I develop the work, and perhaps say a little bit about my visual language, although that could go on for a long time. I'll try not to do that. Charcoal is absolutely my favourite medium. I do work in oil, I work in pastel and oil pastels. I've even tried watercolour, which I enjoyed, but charcoal is definitely my first love, and I will always go back to that. It's incredibly versatile. It's malleable. You can move it around for as long as you like. You know, I could go back to a drawing 20 years later and I can still move it around, but it means it's very fragile too. So it's got these kind of special qualities about it. It's something which appeals to me because monochrome appeals to me, and I'm going to talk about that in a few slides. And it's very direct. You know, it is literally a burnt stick, and it feels right to me to be drawing the subject that I've chosen with that particular material. But I have lots of other tools as well. So I have charcoal sticks, which you'll see here. I have charcoal powder. I have some tools to apply it, but usually I apply it with my hands. And you know, so whether that's holding the stick or applying powder to my hands and finger painting essentially. But then I also have tools to remove it, which are tools like this, which is made from chamois leather, sort of thing that you clean your windows with. And feathers are quite good for it, and brushes and all sorts of other sort of tools to remove the charcoal. And this is a shot of a recently tidied bit of my studio. So I've got different sizes of charcoal. It's all willow charcoal, and there's no other kind there in this little section. Here I've got some found charcoal, so that's naturally occurring. Might have found that at the site of one of those trees which has been burned, or from a natural fire. And then I've got, this is a nitrum, huge, big, chunky piece of charcoal, which was a bit of a splurge on my part because it was quite expensive. But I can say if you are at the process of collecting charcoal to draw with, it's probably not necessary because you can get a huge range of marks from just one piece. You know, very delicate and small, or big and broad. So that's a bit about my tools. And this is one of my favorite homemade tools from a dried hogweed stem. The hogweed is a native plant. It's the stems are hollow, they're very light. It's got a lovely warm feel to it. And I can stick a bit of charcoal in the end. And what it means is that I've got a very long arm, so I can get further back from the work, and it's really useful for mark making if I want to get some distance from the work. And I spend probably more time removing charcoal than I do applying it. So that removal process, the erasure, is really important in terms of, I think of these drawings like two-dimensional sculptures, if that makes sense. That's the feeling that I get when I'm making them. Now, I did my training in three-dimensional design. I made things out of clay and wood and ceramic and glass and metal. I'm used to making things with my hands in 3 dimensions, and I think that sort of tacit knowledge has transferred itself to the way that I make drawings. So they're very sculptural, and the process of making them is feels quite sculptural too. So I'll apply charcoal, the first layer of charcoal to the surface, and then I'll remove it. And you can see me removing it in that photograph with the chamois leather. And I love this quote from William Kentridge, who's probably my favourite living artist, South African artist, who has worked for a very long time in all sorts of disciplines, but charcoal especially. And he's talking about the effect of erasure, it puts onto the surface the sort of time passing. So you've got a record of those changes, that it's never perfect. You can never perfectly erase a mark. And that layering gives the work a complexity that I really enjoy. This is the same work, but in a much later stage of development. So you can see there that the bulk of the tone's there, and I've got just a thin piece of charcoal, and I'm very gradually adding, subtracting, put a bit on, rub it off with my finger, smudge it away, use a brush to soften it, kind of knock it back. So this is where the drawing gets much slower. And charcoal can do both those things. It can do the fast gestural work, but it can also do the slow and delicate work. And this is the final piece. You can see there, just to give you an idea of the scale. I called it Slow Fall because, let's see if I can go back to because it's inspired by this tree. You can probably see some of the elements here, and that big knot hole there, this kind of arc there. So when I visited that tree, it felt like it was already falling. It was just falling too slowly. Sorry, not that. Yes, too slowly for me to see. There we are. And I think there's this idea of the tree being a moving thing that I'm trying to get into my drawings. I'm always trying to get the sense of movement and flow and energy and aliveness, which we might not necessarily think of as trees having. They do move, they just move a lot slower than we do. So I want to say a little bit about monochrome and why that's particularly something that I work in. There's an element of the way my vision works that leads me to prefer monochrome. Just very briefly, I had cataracts when I was a child, so it was an inherited form of cataracts, which meant that I spent some of my childhood either partially sighted or really not being able to see at all. And what cataracts do is they dull your vision, they make everything blurry, but they also dull colours. And I have a theory. I don't know if this is true, but it's my feeling that that's influenced the way that I see things. So if I was in the woodland and I see the tree on the left, that's what you see. You know, I do see colour, but I don't really get excited about colour. Colour isn't something that I would necessarily notice. And what I notice is light and dark. I notice contrast. I notice texture. but the colour information isn't something that gets me excited. And I think that's what artists do. You know, we follow what gets us excited. That's what makes us individual. So, for instance, something like this, which is another tree that has the witch's broom on, although it's a beautiful image, I find the blue really quite distracting. And taking the colour away for this series of artwork, it enhances some of the other things that I'm actually interested in, is the patterns, the shapes, relationships, the contrast, the delicacy. It perhaps makes it a more timeless thing, but I have a strong feeling that colour is definitely not, it's not my thing. That's not to say that I never do any work in colour, but monochrome is definitely where I feel like I can push the boundaries more. It also enables me to explore texture and mark making in a very drawing-centered way, without the distraction of colour choices. So that's a close-up of this work here. just there, just to give you an idea of the texture. Again, it's difficult to see when you're on the screen, isn't it? You just see the whole work. So that's really what I wanted to do with these works, which are fragments, from fragments from a burned tree. There's really nothing left of the tree. This is just some fragments that I found. So those constraints, it's just charcoal, it's just monochrome, actually make me more creative in this particular kind of work. So just to kind of bring all that back together then, some reflections on what the recurring themes might be in my work, and the kind of emotions and associations. I love this quote from John Clare, was a 18th, 19th century poet, who was an agricultural labourer. He wrote poems from the heart and from the perspective of somebody who was working class, very different to most of the poets at the time that would have been known about. I found the poems in the fields and only wrote them down. And this is how I feel about that phase of my work, that where it is based on observational drawing. That the beauty is out there, the stories, the things that are exciting and impressive, they're out there. I just need to bring them back. So it's my task, if you like, to go out and find them. But then I bring those back to the studio, and this is something I prepared for a residency, but I was just trying to bring together, or perhaps articulate, some of the concepts and ideas that run through lots of my work. So this idea of movement and time and different elements of wood and flesh, and this kind of bringing together of the human form and the tree form. Not necessarily to say trees are like humans, we are very different, but I do feel like we have some parallels, we have some overlap, we have things that we can learn, particularly from the way trees that respond to their environment. They have things that they can teach us. And you can see that there, perhaps, in this work, which was inspired by that very strange one-limbed tree. And some of the other imagery that I would bring into it. So I've got, the kind of medical imagery, photographs, art history. These are all the sorts of things that are lying around in the studio and feed themselves into the work. And this is another one from that series that I did a series of about 12 or 15 works. It was such an exciting one to do. And this is a version as drawings from the beach that I called the Shell Beach, but the word relict really summed it up for me, because it's just hanging on, and there's evidence of all the other bits of it that are lying around, and it's just hanging on, and it's such a strange shape, isn't it? Such an unusual tree. And this is another one of the kind of large dark works. Turning point, because it's a tree which is at a turning point in the woodland, at a place where I would walk. And it's part of a series of these kind of ghostly drawings, which I've been thinking about for a really long time, started making last year, and will continue to make next year. So that's a whirlwind tour about how the Landmarks works came about. If you are local and you haven't yet, I would definitely encourage you to see the exhibition. It's on until the 21st of January. There's a virtual tour on the website for the Borough Halls, and also links on my website. So if you aren't local, the virtual tour will still be there and remain in the archive after the exhibition is finishing. And 4 out of the 5 artists are going to be doing an artist walk in Calderwood on Sunday the 14th. So that's not this coming Sunday, but the Sunday after. And I can give you information about how to book that if that's something that you're interested in. If you are too far away from the physical exhibition and you'd like me to send you an exhibition catalogue, I can post one to you if you want to get in touch with me with your email. Really all I wanted to say was, for the talk, I really want to say thank you for coming along and perhaps giving me a reason to focus all these amorphous thoughts that I have and put them together in something that I can tell you about. I do really enjoy talking to people in exhibitions and hearing what people think about the work. It always teaches me something. So I do really value that. If you don't already, you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter. I am also on Facebook, but I'm not as obvious, not as active there. I've got work available from the Kilmorrock Gallery in Bewley at the moment. And you can also buy work directly from the studio. I do teach as well, so teaching drawing is something that I'm very passionate about. I do run an online drawing course called Permission to Draw, which I'm starting soon. And you can send me a message. I do always love to hear from people. I get people sending me photos of trees that they've seen. They say, Tansy, I saw this tree and I looked at it differently now I've seen your work. I really enjoy that. So do feel free to send me a message. So that concludes the talk itself. I'm going to stop sharing that now.